Welcome back to Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality. I'm your host, Enzi, and this week we will be discussing a new poem piece that I wrote this weekend. It is actually new-ish because the original piece was written back in 2006, so I had to make some adjustments. So I'm going to share the poem with you all and then go back and talk about different parts of it. So, here's the poem. I spit. I spit for Langston, who got his dreams deferred, for Tupac, who met an early demise, for Malcolm, who was shot down by the feds in front of his kids. I will spit for Martin, but we have already turned him into a saint, made him an icon for a peaceful revolution, when revolutions can never be peaceful. Non-violent, yes, but not peaceful. I spit for hip-hop that has been watered down by a culture of homophobes, misrepresented by mainstream society. I spit for the truth, yo. Because we would rather rally behind rituals and traditions to secure our comfort, while justice is being abandoned, just because we are afraid to change. And I can't forget the youth who are forced to measure the gap between achievement and race, who are labeled at risk because their pigment just happens to be darker and was never given the same opportunity to soar. And I spit for the same youth who are being raised in a time where educational funding is sacrificed for a political war, so the arts gets cut while we cheer inner city athletes straight through high school arenas to Baghdad air raids. And I spit for those who sees what eyes don't want to see, mixed images like levees breaking and towers falling, because freedom is just that simple and sweet. False feelings of security makes us weak, and I spit for those labeled as refugees in a country of their own, screaming for help on top of the dome. MCs like prophets breaking down the signs of the times and the rhymes. Collapsed bridges on major highways don't even scratch the surface, yo. In this original poem, I say I spit for the Gen of 6. While this is still true, you have to understand at that time, Tamir Rice and Dante Wright were just toddlers. Mike Brown, Oscar Grant, and Jamar Clark were still in their youth. I spit for Sean Bell, Sandra Bland, Breonna Taylor, and Elijah McCain. And the names just keeps increasing. Philando Castile, George Floyd, Freddie Gray, and Alton Sterling. I spit for y'all for sure. And I might just spit for spoken word, because it gives voice to those who are yet to be heard. Well, while I'm at it, I might as well speak for the Showcase What of the Year, for people who are too afraid to make their identities clear. For those of us who are out and proud, because I spit for the expression of truth. I spit for the progression of youth. I spit for prison chains clanging, bodies hanging, dangling from trees. Because I spit for you. I spit for me. I spit for us. One of the questions I'm constantly was asked back when I used to do poetry a lot more was what was the process like? And so first I want to say shout out to TC Jufolk for Jcation and the open mic that was held after Havdalah. It was a really great time to be able to share this poem with you all. And what I want to say is I was trying to figure out what to perform. I didn't want to perform some stuff that I already did, such as the piece that I performed at the George Floyd Square the day of the verdict. So I decided to take a poem that I did back in 2006 and rework it. I generally don't read poetry from that time period or from that long ago, because poetry, specifically spoken word, kind of dates us. It's about what's happening during that time. It is the question of, are some things going to last and stay and be universal? How will this message change via time? And we know that the world is such a very different place than it was back in 2006. Just a very different place. And I suppose as time goes by, we expect for stuff like that to happen. I mean, 15 years is a long time. And yet, some of it is still the same. Some of these concerns and struggles just really don't really change. I think that we can see more and more of an understanding of who Martin Luther King Jr. was beyond what the white washing of him has become. And I'm not sure if I would have kept that line, I was spit for Martin, but we've already turned him into a saint, if I would have wrote that now. I'm not sure, because we are seeing more and more of folks really digging in and unsanitizing and making real what some of the work that Martin Luther King Jr. did, particularly around economics and other issues as well. So I just want to speak on that piece for a while, for that second. And really, back in this time, writing this piece, it was, one of the things is it was still in the height of, not the height, it was on the end of W. Bush's presidency, second presidency. And so if you all remember, at that time there was a major push, particularly around religious-based organizations. I'm going to take a gander and say that it probably was Christian-based, evangelical-based religions, right? But a lot of those programs were getting funded and services, and a lot of other things were not. And our youth were getting, were the ones most impacted by it. And I'm going to say now that the youth are the ones who are mostly impacted by the stuff that we're doing now. So that's just is one of those pieces that is really interesting constantly for me to think about how we are doing things. I wrote this poem. I was not living in Minneapolis at the time, but the achievement gap was huge. But Minneapolis does have one of the largest achievement gaps between black kids and other kids. So I just want to name that. And then finally, I took a lot out of this poem, the original poem, for several reasons, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit, but not really too much in details. The original poem actually alluded to a sexual assault experience that I had. I chose to take that out. I just made the decision to take that out, and I think that was the right decision. And there are some other things that I took out of the poem as well. And one of those was thinking about folks dying of cancer and not smoking a cigarette a day in their lives. I want to name that I was wrong back then, and I want to name that it doesn't matter if a person has cancer or lung cancer, whether they smoked cigarettes or not. It doesn't matter whatsoever. And so I chose to take that line out because it did not work for me. And it was not the same message that I wanted to share. And unfortunately, the message of the Gen 6, which at that time we know that Sean Bell, I believe, was murdered in 2006. But it wasn't really like this. We had a few names here and there. And now things are different. And how do we navigate that? So I really wanted to revive something that was old and new for me at the same time, something that I could kind of take and mold and kind of work with. And so I think I will be doing that a lot more with some of my older poetry, especially as I think through myself and my role and my experience as a person who used to be an evangelical Christian, and so mindful that much of my poetry back then was very much centered around that piece of my identity. So, some folks that ask me what is my journey? How did I get here to the person I am today? And stay tuned for the next episode, because the next episode I will give you all a little story about who I am and how I got to be to the person I am today, particularly a little bit about my story into Judaism. So I'm excited to share that with you all next episode. So first, I'm going to just go ahead and repeat this poem again. Hopefully I'm going to say it a little slower so y'all can hear it. But the words will be available on the site as well. I spit for Langston, who got his dreams deferred. For Tupac, who met an early demise. For Malcolm, who was shot down by the feds in front of his kid. I would spit for Martin, but we have all but turned him into a saint, made him an icon for a peaceful revolution. Revolutions can never be peaceful. Non-violent, yes, but not peaceful. I spit for hip-hop that has been watered down by a culture of homophobes, misrepresented by mainstream society. I spit for the truth, because we would rather rally behind rituals and traditions to secure our comfort, while justice is being abandoned just because we are afraid of change. And I can't forget the youth who are forced to measure the gap between achievement and race, who are labeled at risk because their pigment just happens to be darker and was never given the same opportunities to soar. And I spit for the same youth who are raised in a time where educational funding is sacrificed for a political war, so the arts gets cut while we cheer inner city athletes straight through high school arenas to Baghdad air raids. And I spit for what eyes don't want to see. Mixed images like levees breaking and towers falling, because freedom is just that simple and sweet. False feelings of security makes us weak. And I spit for those who are labeled as refugees in a country of their own, screaming for help on top of the dome, MCs like prophets breaking down the signs of the times and the rhymes. Glass bridges on major highways don't even scratch the surface, yo. In this original poem I said I spit for the Gen of 6. While this is still true, you have to understand at that time, Tamir Rice and Dante Wright were just toddlers. Mike Brown, Oscar Grant, Jamar Clark were still in their youth, and the names just keep increasing. Philando Castile, George Floyd, Freddie Gray, and Harlan Sterling. I spit for y'all for sure. And I might just spit for spoken word, because it gives voice to those who are yet to be heard. But while I'm at it, I might as well spit for the shortest month of the year, for people who are too afraid to make their identities clear. For those of us who are out and proud, because I spit for the expression of truth. I spit for the progression of youth. I spit for prison chains clanging, bodies hanging, dangling from trees. Because I spit for you. I spit for me. I spit for us. Again, thank you all so much for listening to me today. This is Enzi, your host of Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality. Thank you. Kumba Hineni, a podcast on intersectionality, more than just getting deep, is a part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. You can email the show at podcast@tcjewfolk.com. For more information, go to tcjewfolk.com/podcast.